silent and empty. No leaves to rustle, no grasses to whisper. These vast, parched lands are the deserts. Dry as dust, racked with heat, the wastelands of our imagination. And yet, the deserts are very much alive. Even in the driest, hottest deserts, life has found a foothold. According to an Arabic saying, the desert is Allah's garden. He created it for himself, so there would be somewhere on earth where he could walk in peace. The desert is for those who like a challenge. It's a war against the elements. Each day's survival is a battle. The deserts, by definition, are dry places, but nothing can live without water. It's part of every life process. All living things consist largely of this vital resource. This is the desert survivor's greatest challenge, to find water where it doesn't seem to exist. The origin of these formidable places is often told in myth. Some ancient peoples describe how their desert resulted from the tantrum of a turkey, teased beyond endurance about his ugly, raucous voice. The turkey grabbed a burning stick and shook it at his tormentors, burning himself and turning a tropical paradise into a burnt-out shell where few cared to stay. A desert is defined as a place averaging less than 10 inches of rain per year. That's just a tiny fraction of the rainfall in forested areas. Almost 1/3 of the Earth's land surface is arid, but we're a wet planet. Most of the globe is covered in water. Why then do we have so many deserts? The answer blows in the wind. Winds carry clouds of moisture picked up from the oceans. On reaching land, moisture turns into rain. If there are coastal mountains, all the rains fall early on. From there, it's a dry run. Because winds tend to blow from the same directions most of the time, some areas always miss out on rain. These are the world's deserts. They expand and contract as the Earth warms and cools. The Sahara is currently expanding. Some parts are millions of years old. But only 10,000 years ago, there were elephants and rhinos living in the central Saharan highlands. Deserts go to extremes. After sunset, the day's burning heat disperses into the cloudless skies. A blistering day leads to a shivering night, even in the hottest deserts. Desert survivors need to face up to these challenges. The camel should know it takes extremes in its stride. The camel is the largest desert animal and our oldest desert symbol. It's there on Greek and Roman coins. In the Old Testament, camels carried gifts between Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. In Islam, the camel is a creature from paradise. Muhammad's favorite was Al-Qaswa, which he rode on his flight from Mecca. During the journey, Al-Qaswa knelt at a place called Koba. Muhammad knew this was a sign from God and decided to halt. The delay deceived a pursuing army and saved Muhammad's life. The spot where Al-Qaswa knelt is now marked by a mosque. The baking desert is a familiar image. But far away from the equator, the heat of summer gives way to a bitter winter. In the Asian Gobi Desert, the temperature drops to minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit, and the Mongolian desert stays below freezing for half the year. In cold deserts, life must be able to go from oven to freezer. A warm overcoat helps keep out the winter chill. These South American alpacas have thick, soft coats. In Inca times, only people of royal blood were allowed to wear the most luxurious wool of all, from the alpaca's relative, the vicuña. There's one advantage to the cold. Evaporation is slower and rainfall goes further. More vegetation means more food for grazing animals. Desert plants may not look too tempting. They're tough, but they're quickly snapped up. It's possible for a large animal to find a square meal in cold deserts, but it's not easy. Usually food is too thin on the ground to support a herd. It's a case for singles or pairs. Larger animals only survive if they can beat the water shortage. Antelopes have ultra-efficient kidneys which can recycle nearly every drop of water they drink. For those who fail the desert challenge, there's a cleanup crew ready and waiting. Powerful desert birds like the eagle and condor seem to bridge the gap between the worlds of earth and sky. The American Zuni believed that the eagle could soar as far as the sun. It was a natural partner to the gods and a useful messenger. Eagle feathers, used in traditional ceremonies, help the Zuni to contact their gods and ask for the most cherished of desert events, rain. But when temperatures soar, rain quickly evaporates. Nearer the tropics, seasons are less clearly defined. There's no cooling off period. The heat is intense all year round. Large animals can't survive. There's just not enough food. Jackrabbits in the American Sonoran Desert are small enough to find a shady spot. Not for them the sweating and panting of larger mammals. They radiate heat from enormous ears. They keep cool. No sweat. Even plants need protection from the sun. Some cacti have their own sunshade, white hairs to screen their chlorophyll from damaging ultraviolet rays. Small animals are the winners when the heat is on, but there's an exception. Camels were once the international courier service of Asia and the Middle East. They're the only animals able to cross the desert wastes. Camel caravans carried travelers as well as salt, silk, spices, exotic fruits and plants, and news. The ancient silk and spice roads were long and dangerous routes linking China, India, and Arabia with Europe. These barely marked tracks wound across mountains and deserts, and through the centuries were fiercely fought over. In Rudyard Kipling's Just So story, the camel was a lazy beast who looked slightly different from the animal we know today. When reproached for his faults, his only reply was, "Humph." His punishment was to spend the rest of his days working. To help him do it, he got a new profile. With his humph of stored energy, he could go for weeks without a meal break. Since those days, the camel has more than made up for his sins. Whole households are regularly carried on his back. A famous saying describes a camel as a horse designed by a committee. But in fact, the camel is a triumph of design efficiency. The camel's famous hump isn't a personal water tank, and it's not there to improve its looks. It's a backpack full of food, storing fat, up to 90 pounds of it, a powerhouse of energy. The fur coat may seem excessive, but desert nights are chilly. No desert animal wants dust and sand to get in, so when the dust swirls, the shutters go down, but the lights don't go out. These eyelids are semi-transparent, and the camel can see right through them. There's no danger of sinking for the ship of the desert. These feet have wide, flattened toes, like snowshoes. And those long legs keep the camel's body away from the heat of the desert floor. Camels aren't fussy eaters. With toughened lips and tongue, they don't need to be. They can stomach just about anything. Camels have more desert-beating tricks. They tolerate swings in body temperature that would kill other animals. After days without water, they can drink gallons in a few minutes, a death sentence for many other creatures. But even a camel tries to avoid too much exposure to heat. Penguins in cold climates huddle for warmth. Camels huddle to keep cool. So those in the middle are insulated from the midday heat. Camel dung is bone dry. It makes instant fuel for desert campfires. Of course, it does rain occasionally, even in hot deserts. The North American painted desert is marbled with different colored rock layers. When the rain comes, the colors glow, giving the desert its name. Desert rain is unpredictable, short-lived, and often violent. A whole year's rainfall may come in just one downpour. A sudden deluge can be as dangerous as it is welcome. The rushing water carries all before it. Armed with jagged debris, it scours out the softer rock in its path, eroding gullies and canyons as it goes, while the harder rock remains. Ayers Rock in Australia is the largest monolith in the world, towering over the arid landscape around it. Its sides are eroded into deep fissures, caves, and water holes. In Aborigine mythology, a large and dangerous serpent lives inside. When offended, it leaves the water hole and takes the shape of a rainbow springing from the rock. After a deluge, desert dwellers make the most of their unexpected bounty. It may be all they'll get for months, or even years. One plant strategy is to use their roots as underground storage tanks. The African welwitchia's taproot can measure 3 feet across. The champion water storers are the cacti. The saguaro is a famous sentinel of the American deserts. It offers a prickly perch for Harris hawks, where they take maximum advantage of the view. A saguaro can live for more than a century. It takes 40 years just to grow one arm. Its roots are like sponges. They can suck up a ton of water after a rainstorm. The water-filled cells are under such pressure that if the cactus is struck by lightning, it explodes. Tumbleweeds may look like litter, but they're living plants. They have no roots at all and just roll around, absorbing what moisture they can. Dormant plants awake to the magical touch of rain. The first moisture makes the rows of Jericho's seed pods swell, but until there's enough rain, they won't launch the seeds. Once they're out into the world, the seeds germinate and grow within 6 hours. This dramatic regeneration made them symbols of the resurrection of Christ. Some desert animals also seem to rise from the dead, at least in legend. An African story tells how Frog and Gazelle were having a contest. Frog lost the first round, a running race. Then Frog boasted that he could return from the dead. He told Gazelle to burn his house down with everyone inside. The village mourned, thinking the frogs were dead. Years later, after a rare rainstorm, they were amazed to discover the frog family frolicking in a puddle, celebrating their victory over death. The frog's trick was a simple one. During dry times, their outer skin shrivels and they bury themselves, apparently lifeless, for months or even years. When rain arrives, the frogs plump up with moisture, pop out of the ground, and set about a whirlwind schedule of eating and breeding. Their young race through the tadpole stage in rapidly drying puddles. They're not alone. The pools teem with tiny organisms awoken by the rain. In the hottest sandy deserts, like the ones in Arabia and North Africa, the desert challenge is at its toughest. Heat and dust test everything to the limit. Water disappears into thin air, and food prospects are not encouraging. The hottest deserts look like lifeless planets, eerily silent beneath the cruel sun. Indeed, the Arabian Rub al-Khali is known as the empty quarter. But once the sun goes down, it's a different story. These animals hide from the heat of the day, saving energy and water. Once the heat is off, the desert comes to life by the light of the moon. The hottest deserts are unforgiving, as a party of American pioneers discovered the hard way. In 1849, they set out to cross the last desert barrier separating them from the Pacific coast. They reached the other side, but were trapped in a scorching valley. Many died. As the survivors emerged, one turned and said, "Goodbye, Death Valley." It's been Death Valley ever since. Finding the way is never easy in sandy deserts. Landmarks vanish in the wind. Human desert dwellers use the heavens to navigate. The sun by day and the stars at night. Turkestan desert nomads base their navigation on the pole star, which they call the Iron Peg. It takes a cockpit full of electronics to guide a plane across a desert, but a bird reaches its destination using only its senses. And these ants always find their way home. They're going out in the midday sun to forage. It's a good time, as few predators care to join them in the scorching heat. When the ant first emerges, it makes a turn. It moves, stops, and turns again. It seems they are taking a reading on the sun so that when their mission is accomplished, they can head straight for home. Hot desert survivors make the most of every drop of water. Insects are among the winners because their hard, waxy skin keeps moisture in. It's waste not, want not for rodents, too. They lose less than a fifth of the water squandered by their non-desert counterparts. Reptiles also succeed. Their skins are watertight like rubber suits. The rattlesnake's rattling tail does the same job as a hiss, but it doesn't use up water. And deadly accuracy means that energy isn't wasted on failed attacks. Desert animals may be small, but they pack quite a punch. The survival margins are just too narrow for second attempts. The scorpion's poison is so concentrated, it can kill a human. In ancient Egypt, scorpions were associated with deadly evil and darkness. The god Seth was said to carry out his murder attempts disguised as one. People stung by scorpions suspected the supernatural. Sandy desert dwellers are always at the mercy of wind. As winds whirl along, they whip up tiny rock particles. Dust devils are a common sight on desert afternoons. In Arabic, they are called jinns, or genies. Genies are powerful magical beings whose masters, like Aladdin, can conjure them up at will. Desert winds grow with alarming speed, often to storm force. Laden with razor-sharp sand, they sweep along in blinding, choking clouds as much as a mile high, battering everything in their path. These forces are extreme. They carve out the shape of the desert scenery. Wearing down the softest layers first, the winds sandblast every nook and cranny, sculpting a landscape of dreamlike beauty. Dunes, the seas of the desert, ebb and flow constantly. They can move more than a foot a day, and much more during storms. Sand engulfs everything in its path. But it's universally seen as clean and pure. Desert Muslims are given dispensation to perform their ritual washing with sand instead of water. And sand preserves. The ancient Egyptians buried their dead in desert sand and found that the bodies remained almost lifelike. But when they buried their dead in more spectacular tombs, things went wrong. Separated from the sand by elaborate coffins, the bodies began to rot. New techniques were necessary, and mummies were the result. Life in the hot sand calls for a special approach. Sandy desert animals know all the angles. In the hottest places on Earth, the surface sand could fry an egg. It pays to keep contact to a minimum. But sand can be useful for a quick escape. Bullet-shaped heads make burrowing easier. Short legs make for streamlined digging. Some have no legs at all. Things aren't always what they seem in the desert. A shimmering pool of water may be a cruel joke, a mirage. In Arabic, they're called Bar el-Shaitan, lakes of Satan. But it might not be a mirage. There are springs and wells in the driest of deserts. Oases draw on aquifers, bands of porous rock beneath the desert floor. The shifting sands above these underground reservoirs can produce an eerie musical resonance. There's a singing desert in Inner Mongolia near the burial place of Genghis Khan. Local legend says that the unearthly sound is the music of magical princesses trapped in their castles under the encroaching dunes. The date palm is a legendary oasis plant, long-lived and adaptable. Its fruit is nutritious and portable, a staple of the traveler's diet. The date's life-giving properties seem almost miraculous. In myth, even their stones are satisfying. Chinese legend tells how a Taoist priest stopped to watch a game of chess. He became thirsty and was handed a date stone. Satisfied, he stayed to watch the game. 100 years passed without him feeling either hunger or thirst. Oases are the traveler's lifeline. Desert journeys are impossible without them, and they're vital to the camel story. Camels are the only large animals adapted to the hottest deserts, but even they need to eat and drink now and again. With human partners like the Tuareg nomads, camels cross the burning sands of the Sahara, the hottest place on Earth. There may be several days of heat and sand between oases. They're a team. Without the camel, the Tuareg could not travel, and without the nomads, the camel would starve. As desert life continues its daily struggle, the desert zones are steadily expanding. The Earth is in a warming period, which could mean new challenges for the desert survivors. But deserts have always grown and shrunk with climatic change. Some scientists predict that with rising temperatures will come an increase in rainfall. It may get warmer, but it will also get wetter. And water means life.
Eyewitness Museum. Created by combining traditional filmmaking techniques with state-of-the-art graphics. Stripping away the mysteries of nature and science to reveal the essence of each subject. Bringing the world into sharp focus. The making of Eyewitness. The distinct style of the Eyewitness books is the basis for each of the programs. Each half-hour episode is based on a book title. The Eyewitness book's visual style gives the program makers a starting point and a challenge. The challenge of transferring clarity and super realism into moving images and sound. Now let's take a look behind the scenes at the making of Desert. To film Eyewitness Desert, it seems sensible to ask the ship of the desert to be our star. Enter the camel. At first, she seems reluctant to come to work. Perhaps she's disappointed with the Eyewitness limousine. A seasoned veteran of the film business, she relaxes once under the hot studio lights. Maybe the heat just reminds her of home. Over the months, the Eyewitness crew have dealt with animals ranging from a chimpanzee to a cockroach. But the camel is the largest animal they've seen all year, and the hungriest. While our star has breakfast, a wide-angled lens is mounted to get frame-filling shots of the camera in action, dust-free. The director rehearses his shots with the crew.
So it fills frame, and then come out. And then come out to a wide.
And the grips mount the camera on a long jib.
Yeah. Yeah.
With a cracking crew and a cooperative camel, the shots are achieved, one after another. Until someone brings a sandwich on set, and our star insists on taking 5, and a bite. The crew takes advantage of the welcome break as well. But soon it's back to work. She finishes the job early and makes it home in time for supper. A camera crew could spend a lifetime in the desert, waiting for lightning to strike a cactus and still never get the shot. But in the Eyewitness studio, the impossible becomes reality. A scaled-down replica is made from foam and carpeting, and an explosive charge is sealed inside. The director heightens the drama of the explosion with slow motion. Ironically, slow motion photography requires a high-speed camera. A normal video camera is on hand for instant results. Only 2 cactus models were made, so fingers were crossed. Once the camera's up to speed, it only takes a tiny charge to trigger the explosion.
The fuse doesn't come out until a lot later.
Video playback reveals the results. Take 1 is a winner. Now, send it to graphics for the full effect.